you go down to the resources section, all of our content is there, as well as all of our on-demand webinars. So if this is something that you enjoyed and you're looking for additional resources to help you with association and chamber management, that's an awesome place to go. And we also have our blogs on there. And again, we provide this as a resource. It is not something where we're selling our product. So please feel free to use it to help you out in your day-to-day operations.
And Amy, that brings us to today's webinar.
Awesome. Okay, so with us, we have Mary Byers and Harrison Corver. Yeah, it's Corver. So Mary has worked with over 300 associations, probably actually more than that, both individual membership and trade groups. And she is focused on helping groups organizations remain relevant in this competitive environment and challenging environment for sure right now. She is the author of several books and a lot of articles. You should follow her and you won't be sorry. She's the host of a podcast, which I follow, and it's also very useful. She's an association CEO coach and a private mastermind facilitator. Harrison is an internationally recognized author. He's a consultant and a speaker. He has helped over 1,200 associations and membership organizations define strategy, planning, governance, management. He is an honorary member of the Texas SAE and an allied member of the year of the Kansas City SAE. He has been recognized by the Tennessee SAE for his contributions to association management, and he is the recipient of the Chicagoland's Association Forum Organizational Service Award. So clearly they both are in the weeds on this and know what's going on, and they have just published a 10th anniversary edition of their book, Race for Relevance, and they are going to discuss some of that with us today. And let's get started.
I appreciate it, Amy. We are delighted to be here. We're going to start by covering the 6 challenges facing associations today, and then we will move into interview, more of a talk show format, as we talk about what we recommend as a reaction to those 6 challenges facing associations today. One of the things I'll say as we get started here is that the trends that were happening have been accelerated by the pandemic, making it even more challenging and more imperative and more important that associations are thinking not about just the immediate future and recovery, but also about long-term planning and how they govern their associations, their programs and services, and the necessity of having a digital first mindset within their organizations. So Harrison and I are going to take turns talking about the 6 challenges facing associations today. We're going to ask for your input with a couple of polls, and I am going to kick it over to Harrison and let him talk about challenge number 1.
Thanks, Mary. The time famine, the bottom line to this is that the way associations and chambers have been structured is a very time-intensive model. And so we ask our members for a lot of time to come to meetings, time to serve on committees, time to serve on boards, time to participate in government affairs activities, time to get involved in community events, time to read time. And the one thing that we know is that members are scrutinizing how they spend their time. Their calendars are packed and their schedules are full. And so we've got to recognize that we're dealing with a time-pressed member and that we need to accommodate those time pressures. The one thing that I would caution you to is that we quoted a survey in the book where 41% of people said that they didn't serve in the organization or get involved in the organization because they didn't have time. And I think what you have to understand is everybody's got 24 hours of a day. And so we've all got the same amount of time. The question is we're making choices about where we decide to spend that time. So the only other quick point I'd make on this is that if you were to ask me what's one thing that you could do to deal with the time pressures, and that would be to look at your committee structure and ask yourself, it wouldn't be better off with task forces or ad hoc groups that have a very limited scope and have a definite time frame to complete their work in. I think that you're going to find that you're going to be able to mobilize members a lot better using that approach than with the typical 3-year committee term. Mary, turn it back to you.
The pandemic has also shown us that we don't always have to utilize members' travel time anymore. Now that online and virtual and Zoom and Microsoft Teams has made it possible for us to meet instantaneously and conveniently, there's likely going to be a huge change in what volunteering looks like for an organization going forward. Not only from a cost saving standpoint, but from an efficiency standpoint. If we can just hop on and have a committee meeting, why ask 5 or 8 or 12 or 20 people to spend time traveling to a central location? And that's not even probably wise for the foreseeable future as we're still in the pandemic. So that is going to make a difference going forward, I believe. The other question we like to think about here is asking, how can you take the association to the member rather than always asking the member come to the association? And that is applicable to another one of the challenges that we'll talk about in just a minute, and that is the technology opportunity or the technology challenge. But we think the time famine is challenge number 1 because it really underpins everything else. And when you're trying to create meaning and relevance and programs and services for busy people, we need to think about how we can do it bite-sized, how we can make it convenient, and how we can deliver it in a way that's best for members to consume it. The second challenge is value proposition, or what we call the return on investment. And when you are an association that charges dues annually, when a dues statement comes out, you're essentially inviting members to ask themselves, what have I gotten for my dues this year? It's an opportunity to pause and answer the question about value. And one of the things that Harrison and I see in our work is that we see an assumption that the more associations offer, the more value is available for members. But if members are only using a small percentage of your programs and services, then there is a lot that doesn't have value. The Pareto principle, or also known as the 80-20 rule, tells us that 80% of member value comes from 20% of your programs and services. Those are the programs and services that we want to make sure are done with excellence and that should be adequately resourced. And then we would ask, why are you doing the other 80% if it really holds low value? But one of the other things that we see often when we go to association websites, we see pretty much a dump or a listing of everything the association does, and that creates communications clutter. So if I'm visiting your website as a potential member, and there is a little bit of everything there, it's going to be hard for me to understand who you are, who you serve, and how I could benefit. And going back to the time famine, I'm probably not going to take the time to figure it out. So when it comes to value proposition, we need to have a very succinct value statement. I'd say 1 or 2 sentences, no more than that, and one that is easily memorized, easily repeated, and easily shared. And it should be something that all of your board members and all of your staff members know, so that you have a message that is being repeated by all of your ambassadors. So value proposition, and especially as we see changes post-pandemic regarding salaries, regarding income, regarding revenue, this whole idea of return on investment, what am I getting for my dues dollar? I believe that it is going to accelerate in the coming weeks, months, and hopefully not years, but it could be years for some organizations if there has been a shift. I just saw a report this morning that said 49% of physicians have indicated they've had reduced income because of the pandemic. And obviously that's going to have an impact on medical organizations going forward. Harrison?
The topic here is specialization and consolidation. Basically, the specialization within all the professions and the consolidation in almost all the trade groups. But another way of looking at this is the impact of those two trends, and that's the diversity of your membership. Associations work best when all our members look alike. They all have the same needs and wants and interests, and so that's an easier market to serve. But we're dealing with markets now where members are more likely to be different than they are to be alike. And so we have to understand that our markets are dynamic and that they change, and that we have to reflect those changes with our programs and our services. Those of you who are in the chamber business don't have to be taught about the diversity in your marketplaces, because you serve pretty much everybody in your business community. And so everything from the financial sector to healthcare to manufacturing to service industries to hospitality. And so you've got a specific challenge here just because of the nature of your markets. So we just have to understand that this requires thinking through your product line and making sure it's aligned with the marketplace as the members' needs change and evolve. Mary, anything to add there?
One of the things I think we need to be cognizant of in the specialization area, it's actually easier to be a specialty group, even though there might not be as many potential members, than it is to be the large general group like the American Medical Association or the American Dental Association or the American Bar Association, because there are so many differences within the organization. To that, I would just simply say lead from your strengths as a strategy. That is something that we covered in our follow-up book, Road to Relevance. And rather than trying to be all things to all people, we need to make sure that we are being as focused as we can be, because that focus will help create relevance. So let's go ahead. We're going to pause for a minute. We'd love to get some input for you. Amy, if you would go ahead and launch the first poll. We are interested in which of those three challenges is challenging your association the most. Is it the time famine? Is it value expectations, or consolidation and specialization? So we see the votes coming in now. About 30% of you have now voted. 60% of you have now voted. Would love to get full participation here. So I'll sit for just a moment while we have additional votes coming in. Okay, go ahead and close the poll, Amy, if you would, and let's take a look at our results. 51% said value expectations. And if you were one of that 50%, we'd love it if you would put why in the chat so we can exchange some additional information here. 40% said the time famine, and only 9% said consolidation and specialization. So we kind of have a clear winner or loser, depending on how you look at it, in terms of value expectations. So thank you for participating in that poll for us. And we are going to move along with the next three challenges. We wrote about generational differences in both the first and the second new edition of Race for Relevance. And this continues to be a challenge for many, many associations. What we're hearing is that more seasoned professionals don't want to be disenfranchised. But from a strategy standpoint, the future of your chamber or your association rests in strong membership and strong membership engagement. And the future is going to be determined by how many new careerists or young professionals you can bring into your organization. The organizations that are thriving are really being very, very intentional about how they are bringing new careerists or new members into the association. I have one client that is actually starting a separate parallel association, and everything they are doing is different from the way they did it with their more seasoned members. Rather than a website, they have an app. And rather than in-person learning, they've launched a university, basically an online university, which allows for micro bites of their longer programs to be shared. And they've actually gamified this so that as you finish each level, you get badges that you can display in your profiles, and then you can continue to go up through the whole university up until graduation. And when you get to graduation, then the hope is that you are going to be ready to continue on within the association, perhaps as a volunteer. So we're seeing some huge differences in terms of what members want and how they like to access the association. Harrison, you want to add anything to that?
No, but the one thing I would say about this is it's a very significant governance challenge. Trying to balance the needs of and the interests of one generation versus the other. Technology is certainly an area where you get some significant differences, and so you have to ask yourself, how do we deal with the slow adopters, if you will, and Mary's probably going to address this later on, but also meet the expectations of the digital native. So that's a governing challenge.
For sure. I have a couple of resources I'd like to offer if the generational differences are a challenge for you. Sarah Sladek does a wonderful job focusing on this in her book, Knowing Why, Engaging the Next Generation Now. And she also addressed it in her first book, The End of Membership as We Know It. Sarah runs XYZ University, and if you're interested in learning more, she has a newsletter that comes out regularly with helpful statistics and ideas. And I highly recommend both of these books if this is something that your association or chamber is being challenged by. Harrison?
Competition. Got to watch our time here. I just say that to cut to the chase here, I think typically a lot of associations and chambers underestimate the level of competition that they have. Usually an association will say, well, there's really no one association that does what we do, but I guarantee you there are others that are in your space. And as a chamber, you're competing with every trade association in the world because your members can belong to any of them, the restaurant association, hotel association, bankers association, et cetera. So the first thing is to make sure that you do not define your competition too narrowly. For example, I would make the argument that the associations used to own the networking space. If you wanted to network, you belonged to an association or chamber. That was a big value. How many of us think that social media has disintermediated some of us from that networking space? And so looking at social media networking versus our own networking, and I'm not so sure we really see that as, quote, competition, unquote. The other thing is that it's not just associations. I would say associations are only 10 or 15% of the competition. The rest of the competition comes from publishing houses, from trade show companies, from your members. A big source of competition, particularly in the last 10 years or so, comes from members that are using technology platforms that they didn't have before to provide webinars and newsletters and other types of competitive services and activities to the association's offering. So I think that the key to this is to understand that we are in a pretty competitive environment and that we have to kind of meet that competition in terms of the value that they're offering.
And the last challenge that we have is the technology or creating a digital first mindset. And this is a big one. And of all the chapters that we revised for our anniversary edition, I think this and the governance piece got the most attention and the most new information. It is imperative that we double down on our technology investments and that we are looking at things from a member-centric point of view. So it's not just about what we can do with technology, but it's also about how members can access you and use your technology on their behalf. And we've got some great case studies in the book. One of the things that we learned as we compared our statistics from 10 years ago to today is that some associations have actually lost ground in terms of the number of staff they have in this arena. And others told us, quite honestly, they just don't have the expertise that they need on staff. So we're seeing a growing trend toward outsourcing with a technology partner who can help you do what you need to do on behalf of your members and your chamber and or association. The good news is that we have also seen the price of technology come down. And rather than having to have new software created for your organization or new programming or code written, it's very easy and inexpensive to use software as a service, to have things adapted for your association. We did take a look at how much associations, chambers, for-profit corporations are spending. And we suggested that you look at setting aside 7 to 8% of your gross revenue so that you are continually investing in technology. And that was really based on the average that we looked at and what we saw for-profit companies doing. And that's just a guidepost. And so we think you should know your technology spend. And that's not just staffing in that area, and it's not just the hardware, it's everything that you spend in terms of keeping your digital house in order. So Harrison, anything you want to add to that before we take our second poll?
Just a quick point, and that is everybody, the members of everybody on this webinar have one thing in common. They are consumers. And I think you have to look at how technology is reshaped the environment for consumers. Just look at retailing. Amazon just overcame Walmart as the largest retailer in the United States. And so the biggest retailer in the United States is an online provider. And so just think about how you use technology, how you use your mobile phone day in, day out to access information. The next time you take a flight, assuming you're going to fly in the near future, just think about how many times you use your phone during the course of that travel, from checking into the parking lot to checking the arrival time of your incoming flight to your boarding pass, et cetera. So we had to understand that there's an expectation being developed in the consumer arena that we have to measure up to, whether we like it or not.
We have a question here from Jan asking if we can give an example of software or technology resources. And when we talk about this, we're talking about everything from social media. We think artificial intelligence is highly underutilized in the association arena, although we do see some organizations now that are using that so that very, very specific newsletters are going out based on your preferences and what you've clicked on in the past. There's new sentiment analysis that can actually help you predict who is not highly engaged and who might be in danger of not renewing. There's just lots and lots of technology, blockchain, technology that we really have been slow to adapt. And of course, we cover a lot more of that in the book, and we don't have time to go into all of that in depth here. But we think it's an opportunity for you to sit down, and rather than starting with the technology and the software, we think you should be asking the question, what would we like to be able to do on behalf of members? Or what do we need members to be able to do? And then let that drive the decisions that you make. That member-centric approach is an important piece of this. Amy, let's go ahead and launch poll number 2. And then I know we have a couple of additional questions I'd like to get to, and then we'll ask Amy to join us back here on screen as we get into the discussion portion of our presentation today. So which of the following 3 trends is impacting your association the most? Is it the generational differences? Is it competition? Or is it technology? The votes are coming in. Got about 50% of you have participated so far. All right, let's go ahead and share the results if we could. And surprisingly, it's generational differences. We had a prediction before this started that it would be technology, but 41% of you said generational differences is challenging you, 29% competition, and 30% technology. So pretty evenly divided there in terms of the things that are challenging your associations or chambers. I want to make sure that we address a couple of the questions that came in our presentation so far. And Harrison, I'm going to ask you to take the lead on this question. Brian says, I represent a trade association that represents the supply chain for our industry. Any thoughts on how to remain relevant across 6 or more types of business?
Well, it sounds to me, without getting too detailed into this, that if you've got, let's just say the 6 or 7 types of businesses, number one, could you structure your communication so that maybe you have general information, but then you have 6 subsets in your newsletter that says, here's something for this type of business, and here's for business B, type B, here's type C. Can you put together online communities of those 6 or 7 types of businesses where they can network amongst themselves on issues and share information and exchange experience, within their type of business that would be more relevant? So just trying to carve out a space for information or networking or even programming that would be focused on those. And the real benefit, not the real benefit, but an ancillary benefit of that is that, by having a segment for X and Y and Z, it means that you're acknowledging, that they're different and that they need a home within the organization.
We also have a comment about members think that if they don't attend anything, that they are getting nothing out of it. And I think this also too is a little bit tied into the segmentation. We know that we have some checkbook members, and those are members who pay for membership but never attend any events. But we also have other segments within the membership, and those might be individuals who read the publication and get value because of that. It may be members who are digital only, who attend virtual events but aren't a candidate for ever attending an in-person event. And we've certainly seen over the last year the virtual footprint go because of the pandemic. So some associations are using personas, and these personas address that whole concept of members gaining value differently. It used to be that members joined because it was the right thing to do, and it may be that within your organization, some of that is still happening. Taking time to understand the segments and the personas within the organization, I think, is a way to help you find value for those members who join, but they aren't a traditional member in terms of how they participate or how they interface with you or how they get value from you. So thank you for that comment. I'm going to ask Amy to hop in here as we think about everything that we've just said in terms of the challenges. And we've got a series of conversation starters here. And Amy, I'm going to let you lead us off with that, if you would.
I love it. I feel like Oprah. So I think that the main question is, or the starter question, why the book? Why did you decide to release another edition of it?
Well, certainly we saw that the pandemic had accelerated what we knew to be true as far back as 10 years ago. And we felt like the pandemic accelerated the challenges, but we also believe the pandemic has provided a tailwind. In many cases, our boards have been willing to give us more money for investments we need to make, whether they are digital or whether they are experiments that we need to try. And frankly, because we didn't have any choice, the opportunity to experiment and either fail and or recalibrate and keep moving has become part and parcel of associations. And we just wanted to have an opportunity to update our case studies, to update our statistics and our data, but we also wanted to have a playbook for when we emerge post-pandemic.
That's a great point. I love tailwind. I think that that's a great way to describe it, and that boards are starting to recognize that it is the new normal, that it's not a choice whether or not you make changes. So very cool. Let's see. So Harrison, let's talk about boards. So when you were working or still working with associations and chambers during the pandemic, what did you notice or experience as far as governance and the functioning of that?
I'd be interesting in listening to what the participants on the webinar have to say, but I would make the statement that boards did very little in the pandemic, particularly large boards. And the fact is that because of the rate of change in the environment during the pandemic, that my experience, almost all the decisions were either made by the chair and the CEO, or maybe the CEO and the officers, and the boards were informed later on that this is what had happened. And so it really begs the question, if we didn't need our boards, our full boards, during the pandemic, what do we need them for in kinder, gentler times? So that's one observation. The other thing, not so much an observation, but feedback I've gotten from execs, is that they really had a difficult time engaging their boards during the pandemic because of the pressures on them in their workplace or in their practices or whatever. And so it just became another challenge, again, the time pressures, to get the association on the radar scope of the boards, to get them to be engaged during the pandemic. So to repeat, the boards did really very little as a full board, that CEOs and chairs and officers really made a lot of the calls during the pandemic.
Right, uncharted territory. That makes sense. I know Oprah doesn't have to look at her list, but she also doesn't know anything about associations and chambers probably. So, Mary, I love this one. Do you believe that associations and chambers underestimate their competition?
Oh, absolutely. And I could just stop right there. Harrison touched on it earlier. We tend to look at other associations only as competition, but we have for-profit companies that are entering our space. We have companies that are building online education initiatives that put ours to shame. I'm surprised by the number of associations that don't have learning management systems, that don't have a strategy for their online learning, that they aren't repackaging their online learning, that they're not repurposing any of the programs and services that they've done. For-profit companies are running circles around us in this regard. But it can also be groups within the association. It could be some of your own vendors that are competing directly with you. Sometimes we see members start to gather other members around them, and that can be a force that competes with the association. There is value, and if you go to raceforrelevance.com, we have matrices there at the site that will help you with this. And one of the exercises that we recommend is that you sit down and you make a list, either internally and or externally. And I think this is a great exercise for your board to do as well, to make a list of as many competitors as you can come up with. And often when we ask people to do this, they come up with an easy few, but when we push, they will come up with a dozen, 2 dozen, maybe even 3 dozen. I think the record for a group that I was with was 42 competitors. And until they actually sat down and made a list, they didn't even identify some of these organizations. But the thing that I would say, and this is an opportunity coming out of the pandemic, is your competitors can also be collaborators. And we're seeing more of this going forward. And I like to say that collaboration is the new currency. Who is a competitor that you might also be able to form a collaboration with? Somebody, there's ways to get bigger distribution, broader promotion, if you are tapping into what some of your competitors are as well. So understanding the competition is important, but it's not always a dirty word.
That's a great answer. Absolutely. And it is hard. And once you start making a list and really brainstorming on competition, it can be a little bit overwhelming when you take a look at it. One thing I want to just, sorry, hop in. We will include all of the, sorry, it's very smoky where I live. We will include all of the links and everything that Harrison and Mary have referred to. That will be on the website, on the page that we send with the recording. So we're actually sending you a link, and we'll make to the recording, and we will make sure that everything that they have referred to is on that page, so you can check it out on your own. I like this one a lot. So Harrison, if you were an association or chamber executive, which of the changes that are covered in the new edition of Race for Relevance would you focus on personally if you were leading a membership organization?
If I were an association or chamber exec, I'd really put a priority on my governance. I really believe that the key to relevance in the future starts with your board of directors. And I remember an exec one time telling me, he says, we used to be able to produce in spite of our boards. And he said, the environment's too challenging. We can't outperform our boards. And so if you can't outperform your board, the first thing you got to do is you've got to have a board that can perform. And so how we look at, first of all, size, because size makes a difference, and then the composition of our boards. And so really looking at what kind of talent or expertise or experience we need to either capitalize on opportunities or to meet the challenges that we're going to have as an organization, and putting together a board that's intentionally composed to perform. And I think that's the word I would probably use. We need to be more intentional about our boards. We came across some research that this is a survey of 3,000 associations, and it found that only about a third of them interview board members before they go on board. And so I looked at that and said, holy smokes, you mean you're telling me that 60% of our board members go onto a board without even a basic interview? I don't think any of you guys would hire an entry-level employee without an interview, yet we're putting 60% of our board members onto a board without knowing what their qualifications are, what their interests are, why they want to serve, and the like. So I think it all starts with governance. How are you going to overcome the generational issues? How are you going to deal with the time pressures? You have to have a governance team that's intentionally put together to help you direct the organization in that environment.
Wow. When you're saying that, one of the things, and I'm not trying to get too personal about me and Stedman, I'm just kidding. But one of the things that I recently experienced is that I was there was a call for a local association here, and they were looking for board members. And I submitted a resume, and I guess that 30 people submitted resumes, and they narrowed it down and interviewed people for it. And then I have also gone through the experience where I was at a different organization where I was the only person and they just needed a pulse. So I've seen both sides of that spectrum, and it's odd for sure. Harrison, when you were talking about boards and the governance, you were talking about, you referred a little bit to like the size of the board. And so, and with effectiveness, why do you think it is that some organizations resist downsizing their board?
I think there are a lot of reasons. I think some of it's simply tradition. This is the way we've done it. Number two, I think there's a false sense of security in numbers, that the bigger the board, or at least a larger board, is less vulnerable to being hijacked by a small group or whatever. But I think the one thing, and I'll just touch on a couple of points. I think we ignore a lot of research on the way teams and groups perform and the dynamics of teams, particularly due to size. And there are three things. One, the Ringelmann effect. And Ringelmann did this experiment over 100 years ago. He was a French engineer. He was the guy that put 5 people on either side of a rope and measured how much pull they were getting. And then he found that we put 10 on each side, that while there was more pull on the rope, the pull per person goes down. So the more you add to a group, the less they contribute individually. So if you want to get the best out of your people, you're probably going to get the best performance with a smaller group. Number two, a professor at Harvard, a guy by the name of Hackman, studied teams and group dynamics for 50 years. And there are a number of academics that have studied this, and it's kind of lost on associations. But basically, what he found out that was an impediment to group performance was the number of interactions or links that you have with larger groups. And it grows exponentially, so that if you have 2 people in a group, there's only 2 interactions. But when you go to 10 or 20 or 30, the number of interactions and relationships that people have to manage go up. And so sometimes you get on boards that are large, they don't even know who people are on the rest of the board, much less have a relationship or ability to collaborate with them. And finally, the larger the board gets, or the larger the group gets, the increase that you get in what some people call organizational overhead. And that overhead is the time and effort that you spend communicating and coordinating versus doing the work. So if you think about just trying to get 40 people on a Zoom call, what that takes. And so when the larger the group gets, again, that overhead cost of communication and coordination detracts from the amount of time that you're really spending on the real work. And I think if people were more aware of some of these dynamics, they would be less supportive of the large boards.
You know
That
what
makes
we
sense.
anecdotally, Amy, is it's a difference of night and day. We have examples of boards that have reduced size from 85 down to 18, from 52 down to 12. Size isn't the only thing that matters. We believe in, carefully selecting, as Harrison said, a very intentional and deliberate recruitment process. But when we talk not only to the execs who work with, resized, recalibrated, reconstituted boards, they'll tell us it's the difference of night and day, and the board members themselves will tell us it's a big difference. In fact, ASAE has done some research about this, and dissatisfaction with board service increases after the board gets above about 20 people. So there is some research about this that gives us some hard data, and it's just impossible to engage a huge number of people. I mean, Harrison and I have been in boardrooms where you've got dozens and dozens of people on the board, and the board is so big you can't even see each other in the boardroom, and it's very hard to build trust or a feeling of teamwork or safety in those larger boards.
That's some great information. A little side note, one, on GrowthZone.com in the Knowledge Library, we do have a board onboarding kit, ebook, whatever you want to call it. And so that's something that you may find useful, as well as information on what to include in the board book. So feel free to check that out on GrowthZone.com. And then on a side note, talking about and just touching a little bit on what Harrison was saying in group dynamics, there is an organizational psychologist named Adam Grant, and I came across him on a podcast, and he's fantastic. So if you have a chance to, and he does TED Talks and he's really great. But so that's Adam Grant. I'll put the link to his website also with the recording. Okay.
Let me just jump in here, Amy. I want to encourage people, while they've got us live and in person here, to put any questions they have in the Q&A so that we make sure we don't miss them. And in the remaining time we have available, we'll be happy to answer anything that we can. So thanks for letting me just remind participants about that.
Yeah, and if you've put a question in the chat, if you would do us a favor and maybe put it over in the Q&A, because the chat is so active, which is awesome, but it's also hard to make sure we're not missing anything. So question for Mary is, why do you think that the digital first mindset is imperative for association leadership?
Harrison mentioned it earlier, and that's because we're all consumers. So our expectations about what we should be able to do and how we should be able to access content is determined by what we see in the greater environment, whether it is Amazon being able to get a book to us within 24 hours, whether it's the ability to immediately download an electronic version of a product, whether it is the ability to do a search and access information and resources that we might need after hours. That's what we're been exposed to, and that's what we expect. But many of our associations don't follow that. And if you need help, but it's after hours, you're kind of stuck. And we need to be thinking about how we can not only be 24/7 access, but how we can meet people where they are and deliver content in the way that they want to receive it. Every association should have a mobile strategy in addition to, as part of their digital first strategy, because if you think about it, that's how many of us, and especially when we're talking about new careerists or younger professionals, that's how they're accessing the content sources that they interact with. And we just have been very, very slow. I am still surprised when I work with a new client and I go to their website. I am surprised how antiquated websites are, how non-intuitive they are, how difficult it is to find the information that I need. I always look at it through the eyes of a prospective member. And we have used, in many cases, our websites as dumping grounds. So we put everything there, but it's not well organized. And it isn't easy to find the things that we need. So, and when we think about this, if we can free up, if we can automate and systematize and free up current staff from doing things manually that we can use digital transformation to do, we can picture the promise and we can reuse those staff to be growing our influence, to be growing our input, to be helping us with member recruitment and retention, whatever the case may be. So we not only need to think about it in terms of having a member first way of looking at things, but it can also free staff up to be doing more meaningful things on behalf of the association and members.
Which is a great segue that I absolutely will say GrowthZone Association Management Software, which also has a chamber edition, is key to making those things happen. And on a little side note, then we're going to get to questions. I read an article this morning, And it actually said, and I hadn't thought of this, we need to quit referring to digital marketing as digital marketing. At this point in the game, it is marketing. So that was an article in Forbes, and I found that to be something to think about. All right, so Mary, if you have the questions, are you seeing those? Are you able
I
to see
am,
them?
and
I'll let you guys do that, and we have a few minutes left. And if we go over and somebody needs to leave, that's great. You'll still get the recording. And if we're a little bit over and you want to stay on, we would love it.
I've got one question here that we haven't answered yet, and then I'm happy to send it back over to you, Amy. Tammy says, dues revenue is shrinking with M&A activity. What new revenue streams are you seeing? Our main ones are events and our in-house recruiter. I'll start with an answer, and then I'm going to let Harrison add to that. One of the interesting things, and I didn't mention this on the whole digital first piece of it, and shame on me, because this is been a focus for me in the digital first arena. What we're seeing in the case study that we included in the book is we're seeing that the data that you are getting through a digital first, whether it is data about usage patterns, sometimes the data will help you decide where to put an event. We're also seeing associations that are collecting data and then using that to build revenue on behalf of their organization. So that digital first transformation not only has the convenience factor, but it could also have a revenue factor. And the case study that we used in the book, they are expecting to have well over $1 million in income because of what they've been doing. They've taken what used to be a paper standards book, they've digitized it. It's now being included in software, and then that data flows back to the association, and they're using that then for innovation. So I think the digital transformation actually can help drive some revenue. Harrison, have you seen anything worth adding?
Well, I'm trying to track with you and then with the question on at hand, but I want to go back to the question because it was specifically with M&A activity, the dues revenue is shrinking. And the question I've got is to Tammy is, do you have a dues cap? And when you established that dues cap, did you have any clue that the consolidation would get to the level it is? So I'd take a look at, I wouldn't walk away from looking at the dues increase, even though they're never popular. Price increases are not popular either. But I think sometimes we default to non-dues revenue too quickly. So I wouldn't make the assumption that we're tapped out on dues.
Appreciate it. Amy, we're going to kick it back over to you at this point for some closing comments here. And it's been our pleasure and our privilege to be here with you today.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you everyone that has taken the time to join us. And I know that I found this very informative. And so a couple of quick reminders that we will send out the recording, and we'll send out an email, and it'll have a link to the web page with the recording. I'm going to go through and put every single link, hopefully, that we talked about on here, so you can leverage some of the resources that we've been talking about today. The book, the 10th anniversary edition of the book, is available on the ASAE website, and as well as your typical online giant retailer. So, but the ASAE website has that, and they do have a discount for members. And we know that we love membership. So, all right, we have live group demos. So it's a no pressure way to check out GrowthZone Association Management Software that also has a chamber edition. So go to our website, growthzone.com, sign up. Again, it's just a quick look, and you'll be on there with other people. You don't even have to say anything. And just see what we have to offer and how we can help you improve the efficiency and the productivity and the revenue associated with your organization. And I think, do we have any more slides, or was that? Oh, look at that. All right, so that's it for us today. And again, thank you for joining us. Look out for that email and also for the CAE credit email. And again, if something goes awry, go to the website, growthzone.com, to the Knowledge Library, and we will have the on-demand webinar right there in the Knowledge Library. So that's it. Thanks, everybody. Have a fantastic rest of the day and a fantastic rest of your week. And we hope to see you soon.
Bye-bye.